Alright, let's do another sound test, make sure my recording's working. Alright, awesomeness. So then let's get started. Today's class is called All About Layers. I'll be starting at the beginning and showing the basics of what layers are and what they do. There's so many things that layers can do that there's no way you could ever cover them all. But we will cover lots of them today, so put on your hats and your pens and your whatevers, and we'll have some fun. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about what a layer is. Up in the upper left corner of the screen, you'll see the layer menu icon. Looks like two sheets of paper on top of each other. And when you tap that, you get the layer controls. I can't record and have the layer thing up at the same time, so let me record and then show you. When you open up the layer controls along the left hand edge, you'll see what looks like a bunch of rectangles or whatever the shape of your canvas is. And each one of those rectangles is a layer. You can think of a layer as a transparent drawing surface. Normally they're completely transparent, and you can tell they're transparent because of the little checker box pattern that they have. That indicates transparency. You can also tell which layer is selected by the blue background around it. It means it's highlighted with blue. That is the layer on which you will draw or paint if you use any painting tools. You can select a layer to draw upon simply by tapping it. I've selected the second layer, and by second layer I'm counting from the bottom. The bottom one is the first layer, the second layer comes above that, etc., etc. Right now I have, I think, 5 layers available to me. Alright, so let's draw a nice red square here on our second layer. Now let me show you on the layer menu what that looks like. You'll see that there is a square on the second layer and nothing on the layer underneath it. Now over to the right of the layers themselves in the layer menu are a bunch of controls that do different things for the layers. Right now we're going to look primarily at the transform control. When I tap on the transform button, that puts me into transform mode for the layer that I have selected, which in this case has my red square on it. Once I'm in transform mode, I can then move the layer around by using a single finger to move it around like this. In other words, I can reposition the layer to any place that I want. If I use 2 fingers, I can pinch and zoom by moving my fingers in and out, and I can also rotate the layer by turning my fingers on the screen like this. There are also some numerical controls down at the bottom that allow you to be very precise about your positioning by entering actual numbers, such as the degrees of rotation or how big you want it to the X and Y axis and stuff like that. I don't use those too often, but they're there, so let me show you where they're at. And also at the bottom of the screen there's a couple of quickie buttons, 0 degrees, 45 degrees, and those will turn your layer so that it's exactly 0 degrees, which means where you started, and then 45 or whatever, so you can rotate the entire layer that way. Right, the numbers, I don't use them much. Usually I just pinch or zoom or twist my fingers around to get what I want, but you can type numbers in there if you're trying to get something lined up exactly so. Sometimes that will be helpful, but yeah, I don't use it much. I don't need to usually be that exact. The last thing at the bottom, there's a flip X and flip Y, and that will reverse the image from left to right or from top to bottom. Of course, with a square you won't be able to see much, so let me draw a more unusual shape and show you how those work. Alright, so now we're back to our square. So we've seen a single layer and we've drawn a square on it, and I've showed you a little bit about the transform operations that are available. So let me stop for a moment, see if there's any questions thus far. Any questions? Yeah, I drew the square with the vector tool with fill on and the square constraint applied to it. We're not going to talk about the tools too much. We're trying to mostly work with what layers do, but yeah, that's what I did. So now let's go on a little bit more to the next possibility here. Were there more questions? I didn't see any other questions. The ones about, am I going to sing? I'm going to sing. No, I'm not going to sing. Of course not. So now I'm going to open the layer menu again, and I'm going to select the layer above the layer I currently have selected by tapping it, and then I'm going to draw a blue square on that layer. So here we go. Alright, and a couple things to notice. The layer above has the blue square. The layer underneath that has the red square. So that means that anything I draw on the topmost layer will cover whatever is on the layer or layers underneath it. So the blue square covers the red square. And now here's where it gets a little more interesting. I know the squares aren't interesting, but they demonstrate what I'm trying to talk about here. The transform of the layer is going to only affect that layer, which means I can now reposition the blue square just by transforming the layer it's on and moving it around, and it will continue to cover the red square wherever I put it. Allows me to reposition it without changing anything about the red square layer. Even if I transform it by rotating it or scaling it up or down, it continues to be above the red square. Now another interesting thing about this is that I can now select the layer on which the red square resides, and I can move it without moving the layer above. So this demonstrates one of the most useful, I mean, there's so many things that are useful about layers, but this is one of the most useful things about layers, is that you can put things on different layers and they remain separate, and yet it looks like an entire drawing, and you can reposition them without modifying the other one. So it's a way to keep control of what you're trying to create and be able to move things around within the canvas even after you've already painted it or drawn it there. Okay, what does tile do? I actually wanted to avoid talking about tile at this stage, but I will come back to it, so stick around and we'll show you what tile does. But I want to get through the basics first, alright? Okay, so at this stage, let me go up to the next layer above, and I'm going to draw a green square up there. Alright, so I now have 3 layers. Green square on one layer, blue square on the layer under that, red square on the layer under that. So now let me demonstrate one of the other cool features about layers is that you can reorder them. Just like shuffling paper, you can move one to the top. So let me take and move the blue one to the top instead of the green one. And you do that by tapping and holding on the 3 little bars on the layer, sort of on the right side of the layer, and then you just drag it to where you want it. So now that I've moved that layer to the top, the blue is on top, so it now covers the green and the red. And of course, since they're all separate layers, I can still move each one around separately and it will retain the order that I've set for it from top to bottom. I will be doing a demonstration later that shows some practical applications of layers. Right now I'm just trying to get through how they work so that you understand. Each one is like a transparent piece of paper, one on top of the other. Whatever's on one layer doesn't affect the other ones, except whatever's above always covers what's underneath. Now there's this whole other issue of transparency, but we'll get to that later as well. So right now we're just talking about 3 layers that we have, blue, red, green, and we can reorder them, and we can change their position, their rotation, their scaling, each one separately. Okay, any question about the layers so far? The reordering of them or the transforming of them, anything like that? Okay, everyone's good so far? Let's move on to the next piece then. One of the great benefits of having things on separate layers is that you can then modify them, edit them, paint on them, whatever, separately without affecting what's on your other layers. No, there's no way to name them yet, but that is a feature request that's in the works, I understand. I'm going to name mine George and Bill, and maybe Susie. Okay, so let me talk a little bit further about editing a single layer. There's a lot of ways to do that, but what I want to demonstrate is a specific way. So let me get rid of my squares here for a minute, and we'll change to a circle. Alright, there we go. Now we got a circle, green circle on a single layer. Now I'm going to select the layer above the circle. Yeah, it's named Petey. This is Petey the circle. Now along the right hand edge of the layer menu there's a whole bunch of things called blending modes. You'll see them on the right there. Multiply, normal, burn, dodge. The one I want to look at first is at the very bottom. It's called on, O-N. I doubt it's a perfect circle. I just did it by eye. It looks pretty good though, doesn't it? Just lucky, I guess. Alright, so I have selected the layer above the layer that the green circle is on, and I have set the mode of that layer to on. What the on mode does is it allows you to draw on one layer, and it will only draw where there is paint on the layer directly beneath it. So in this case I can draw anywhere on my second layer, the one that's above the green circle, and the only place the paint will show up is where the green circle is on the layer underneath it. Okay, that's probably clear as mud, so let me demonstrate. I'm going to draw some stuff on my layer that's above the green circle. I'm going to draw some blue circles, and you'll see that they only draw where the green circle is underneath, and the rest gets clipped off of there. This means you're guaranteed to stay inside the lines when you color the thing. And that's what we're going to do with it right now. And so I'm going to erase or clear the layer that my blue ones are on, and I'm going to do something slightly different. Let me explain what I'm going to do before I do it. I'm going to choose a color of green that is slightly darker than the color that I have, and I'm going to pick a big soft round brush. So now with my soft round brush, I'm going to paint on the layer above the green circle, the layer that is set to on mode, and that will guarantee that I stay inside the lines. And I'm going to use that to shade the circle slightly and make it look more three-dimensional. It's like magic. It's almost as if I could stay inside the lines when I color, which I really can't do. But I don't have to because of on mode. So now I'm going to do the same thing on the same layer. This time I'm going to use a lighter color of green to shade the other side as though light were hitting it. It's Petey the P now, yeah. Okay, so this is being recorded, and the video will be up on my site, on my pages, and hopefully eventually in the classes section too. I have like 2 classes that are still not there, but eventually they make it there. So yeah, the video will be there, and you'll be able to see it again. Okay, so just to reiterate what we've done, we've drawn a green circle on one layer, and then we've gone to the layer above it, set that layer to on mode, and then we've used a soft brush to shade with. Now if I turn on mode back off, if I put the layer back to normal, you'll see how badly I actually stayed inside the lines. I will be talking about transparency in a bit, but no, we haven't used any transparency so far. Everything's just been full. Okay, so let's leave that where it's at for the moment. That layer will always stay on, yeah. Once I'm done with it and I'm happy with it, I'll often merge it. So I guess that segues into talking about merge. Let's do that. Now on the right side of the layers menu stuff, again, you'll see there's a button that says merge. Right now it says merge down, and that's because I have a single layer selected. And if I click merge down, it will combine the layer that's selected with the one underneath it. Now depending on the blending mode, sometimes this gives undesirable results, or unexpected ones anyway, but in this case, with the on mode, it works exactly the way you'd expect. So I'm going to demonstrate that by clicking the merge down button, which will combine my two layers into one. So now I have my one green P2P layer all by himself, and I can move him around, do whatever I want with that single layer. Alright, any questions so far about on mode and how it works? Alright, everybody's good? Oh, when you merge it down, it automatically resets that layer to normal. So now I just have a single normal layer that shows the effects that I created using the on mode, but on mode is no longer part of the situation. Okay, so now we have our little green pea, and we've named him and everything. But he's living in this white world where there's nothing there. It's boring. So we need to create some kind of a little bit of environment for him. And of course, layers to the rescue. So what we're going to do now is select the very bottommost layer, and we're going to use the fill color tool. I'll show you how that works, to fill the entire layer with a single color. Alright, so to use color fill, you select the layer you want to fill with a color. You click on the color fill button, and then you pick the color you want. So let's do that. Alright, so I've set the bottommost layer to a sort of darkish purple. Now I'm going to use another layer. I'm going to move it down so it's right above the bottom layer. And I've selected the layer. I've moved it, so it's now the second layer. The first layer has the purple. The second layer is currently empty, so it's transparent. The third layer has the green pea on it. Now I've colored in part of my layer with a darker purple. I just used vector with the square again. Now I'm going to transform my layer a little bit because he's much too level. Now I'm going to demonstrate another cool thing about layers is I can change my mind. I don't like where the layer is, so I'm going to move it to the top instead. Now we have a little bit of an environment for our green circle. It's a little bit more interesting than the white was. You don't have to tap to drag the layer around. You just have to be careful that you put your finger down right on the little 3 bars that are on the right side. If you have particularly big fingers, it can be hard to do. Sometimes I have trouble, but right now I'm using a stylus that makes it easier. Think of it like moving paper around in a stack. It's basically a stack of papers. So whichever one you put on top is going to be covering the ones underneath. Yeah, try it a few times. You'll get the hang of it. You just have to put your finger down in just the right spot. Wait for a second, and you'll see that it starts to move, and then you can move it around. Okay, and how the layer that I just did got its shape? I just drew the shape. I drew it level to start with, and then I transformed it to sort of change the angle of it a little bit, and there it is. Okay, so let's add a shadow to this guy. Uh, I'm going to use the vector tool on the new layer that I've just moved down. Let me show you the order of my layers again. I'm going to set my drawing mode to a circle oval constraint, and I'm going to use black, black, black. Okay, it took me a couple tries. So now I have a very sharp looking shadow. It doesn't really look that much like a shadow. It looks more like a hole. But it's on the layer underneath the green pea, so the green pea covers it up. And then it's above the other layer, so the black covers that up. And I can still move the black thing around, the black oval, because it's on a separate layer. Yes, you fall down the hole. Alright. So now, in order to make my shadow look a little more like a shadow, I'm going to use a layer filter. We haven't talked about filters yet. So layer filters are underneath the filter button in the layers menu, and there's a whole bunch of them. And what you do to use one is first you select the layer you want to operate the filter on, and then you click the filter button, and then you pick the filter you want, and then you set the properties of the filter. The properties of the filter are different depending on which filter you're using, and there's a whole raft of them. Now the one we're going to use is called Gaussian Blur. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the layer that has my black oval on it. I'm going to click Filter. I'm going to choose Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to increase the amount of blur just slightly and then say OK. Alright, there we go. Now we have a more, there is another blur, there's just a regular blur. In case you don't have Gaussian blur, you can use regular blur. They're similar. Gaussian is a little more fuzzier around the edge. Alright, so by sort of blurring out my circle, now it looks a little more like a shadow, because shadows normally have soft edges. And of course, since everything is still on separate layers, I can move them around and reposition them as I choose. Just like that, I have a floating ball instead of one sitting on the surface. All right, yes, the bouncing pea, floating pea. All right, any questions so far? Okay. Wow, we're not going to get to everything I wanted to get to. We've already spent an hour. There's so much in layers, but we'll see how far we get. I'm going to do another hour or so. So, no more questions so far on what we're doing? I'll go to the next part. Okay, so Pamela asked the question about what the tiled option does when you're transforming. So I'm going to show you that, and we're going to use that to segue into the next thing. So I have my my green pea, and I have my background and everything. So let's take those all the layers that we have here, and we're going to merge them all into a single layer at the bottom. I'll show you how that works. Now, since I've done this before and I have a plan, the first thing I'm going to do before I merge everything is I'm going to take my layer that has the P on it, I'm going to move it up to the top so that there is a empty layer underneath it, and I'm going to use the copy button to make an exact copy of the layer. I now have two P's and no pod. That didn't record. I'm going to turn off one of the layers by making it invisible. That won't destroy what's on the layer. It'll just make the layer invisible so that it doesn't show. And to do that, you tap on the little eyeball icon that's right next to the layer on the left. Now I'm going to select the bottommost layer, and I will now have two merge options. One says merge all, one says merge visible. Merge all will take all of the layers and merge them into one. Merge visible will just take the visible layers and merge them together. So that's the one I'm going to use, merge visible. Okay, so now we have one layer with the P on it, which is currently set to be invisible, and we have one layer that has this entire thing on it with the background and the shadow and the P all on one layer. So we're going to have some fun with this guy. So Pamela wanted to know about the tiled option when you're doing a transform. So to get to the tiled option, I'll have to do this in stages because I can't actually talk while I'm transforming. The microphone goes off. So to get to the tiled option, you choose the layer you want to transform, click the transform button, and then click at the bottom where the little gear is and select tiled. Once you have selected tiled, then when you scale the layer by pinching with your two fingers, takes two fingers, pinch in and out, it will, instead of just changing it to a different size, it will actually repeat. I think it's easier to see what I mean if I do it. So let me transform with tiled and I'll scale it down and you'll see what I mean by it repeats. So now we've created this interesting pattern by using the tiled feature. And there's an additional feature of this, because you don't have to scale or change the shape of the layer only by pinching. You can also do it by tapping and holding on the little white dots around the edge. Those are like handles. And the handles work in different ways. If you tap and hold on one of the handles that's in the middle of an edge, you can move just that edge around. If you tap and hold on one that's at the corner, you can move just that corner around. Let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so now you've seen how you can skew it and get perspective warps. Now I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to use one of the corner perspective warps, except this time I'm going to put tiled on so that it repeats itself. Alright, so now we have an even more bizarre and interesting little pattern here. We're going to continue to play with it by using the kaleidoscope filter. So I'm going to use the same layer. I'm going to go to the filter menu. I'm going to choose kaleidoscope, and then I'm going to adjust the size of the thing until I get something I think looks cool. Alright, so we have now transformed our P into this magnificent and very interesting kaleidoscope pattern, and we're going to take it one step further. Now you remember the unchanged P that I left on a layer. Let's go get that guy. So I've turned that layer back on, and I'm going to drag him down so he is underneath this pattern layer. Of course, once he's underneath there, you can't see him anymore because this layer covers it up. However, I am now going to go to the layer that has the pattern on it, and I'm going to set it to on mode. Ooh, like magic. Now I have the pattern on the ball, and I can transform the layer that has the pattern on it to change it and move it around to adjust what I get for a result here. So this is a way to do some very detailed patterns and what have you, textures, and then apply them to whatever you have drawn underneath here. In this case we've used a simple circle, but it works on any sort of thing that you're drawing. It's just a lot of fun to use layers and patterns and things to create these cool textures. So did that answer your question, Pamela? Okay, cool. Now there's one more thing I can do still with my layer. The layer that is currently has the pattern on it and it's set to on. One of the other what do you call it? One of the other features of layers is they have an opacity setting. And opacity is how opaque are they? How hard are they to see through? So by adjusting the opacity of a layer, I adjust how transparent it is. The less the opacity is, the more you can see through it. So I'll turn down the opacity a little bit on my pattern layer, and you'll begin to see the original green pea show through again. Okay, so any questions so far on all the different things that we've seen today about layers? Okay, so well let's cover some of the blend modes. I don't want to go through all of them because they're so many and they're complicated. But let's go through the ones that are the most, what I consider the most useful ones. Yeah, that's a good point, Tori. Before you do any kind of merging, you should always save your sketch into a new slot so that it's safe in case the merge doesn't go well or you decide you want to undo it later. Once they're merged, they're merged. So be forewarned. No, copy down is still going to merge them, so it's just a slightly different type. It'll copy rather than combine. But either way, once you start, putting layers together, you can't separate them again. Okay, so moving on to some of the blending modes. Uh, let's start over here with a new canvas. Alright, so I started with a new canvas. I set my bottommost layer to a gray color, and then I've drawn an oval on the next layer up that is more or less skin tone, I guess. The first layer mode that we're going to look at is, we've already looked at on, but the next layer mode we're going to look at is called multiply. So I'm going to choose the layer above the layer that has the oval on it, and I'm going to set the mode to multiply. Additionally, I'm going to set the opacity of that layer to about 20%. That will make it so that it's somewhat transparent. I'm now going to use a full black color and the vector tool, and I'm going to draw on the multiply layer. And the effect that multiply will have is to darken whatever's underneath it. And since I'm using black, it won't alter the color of anything, it'll just darken it. So basically this is a really nice way to do shadows and shading. So I've done, I've drawn sort of a face on poor Egbert here. Now since I have this on a separate layer, I have this multiply layer that I've created, and it's separate from the underlying egg layer. I can change how dark it is by adjusting the opacity. Again, this is one of the cool things about layers, is they remain separate. So you can change things around without having to completely redraw or repaint whatever it is. And yeah, I could set it to on. Let's see what happens if I do that. I don't think it'll change a heck of a lot here. Well, it will because of the darkness of it. It didn't change at all, but that's because I didn't go outside the lines. It's also because I used black and I didn't use any colors, so it's okay. So multiply is mostly for shading. Evil laugh. And the other blending mode that I use quite a bit is dodge. So let's show you how that works. I'll pick another layer, the one above there. Multiply will just darken. Alright, let me see if I can explain the difference between multiply and normal before I move on. Okay, so this is with the layer set to normal. I put some colors in there so that you can see how they're combining with what's underneath. I used a little red and a little purple and a little black, and you can see that they still look red, purple, and black. Now when I set it to multiply, I don't know if it'll show up so much on the stream, but the colors become darker because it's a slightly different math, basically, is what it is. The way that the colors are combined between one layer and the next is a different math thing that goes on in there. It's added up a different way, so they're darker. Now all of the various blending modes are basically math. So let me set it to screen and you'll see what happens if I use screen. Screen is a sort of a lightning type of algorithm that goes on in there. As you can see, screen didn't lighten very much because the colors I used were darker. If I had used a lighter color, then it would have shown more effect. So let me do that. Let me add something light color to it. Now if I turn this back to multiply, the places where I put the really light color will change too. You'll see what I mean. Alright, well, as long as we're doing this, let's go down through the modes. Each of the modes will have a slightly different way of combining. You're always combining the layer that you're on with all the layers that are underneath it. So depending on what colors you have and how bright they are and what colors are underneath them, they can combine in different ways. Now the real trick is learning over time, and this, I mean, I'll have to give another demonstration later about practical ways of using these. Which which of the modes are going to give me the effect that I want, because at first, when you first start playing with them, it's almost like I don't know what they're going to do. But that's also sometimes nice, because if you don't know what it's going to do, sometimes it'll surprise you and you'll come up with something you didn't expect, and that could be fun. Alright, so we just don't have time today to go through every mode and what they do. So, is there any questions on the basics of the multiply mode? Yes, he's unhappy. We don't have time to look at all the blending modes. Yeah, all right. I'll get to overlay. Let me go through dodge first. Okay, so the dodge layer works a little differently. Rather than darkening, it lightens. So I'm going to take the layer that's above all these guys, and I'm going to fill it with black, and then I'm going to set it to dodge, and it will look like nothing happened, because wherever it's black, it has no effect. It doesn't lighten anything. I'm sorry, I don't really have any suggestions about grids. I don't use them, so I have not developed any techniques for using them. But there are a lot of really good grid users around. You should probably ask one of them. Now there's different ways to use dodge. This is just one way I find it gives me the best results. I start with the layer completely black, and then I pick a slightly gray color, not white usually, because that's too it has too much of an effect. So I'll start with a darkish gray and use a soft brush on a fairly low opacity, and now I will paint over the top of this, and it will lighten the underlying layers wherever I paint. You can also use screen. Screen works similarly to dodge without, it isn't quite as harsh. Uh, I like dodge because it makes things kind of glow. I like to do kind of glowy effects. Alright, so that's the basics of dodge. You can use dodge and multiply to shade your drawings. And by the way, if you want to see some demonstrations of using both multiply and dodge in a more complicated drawing, the class I recently did on starting with pencil actually does go through all of those things, and that might be helpful to you to go watch that one as well. I don't seem to have that one in my list, but this is one I did recently. It uses dodge and multiply extensively to create the various shading and light effects. If you go to the starting with pencil compo, which is currently ongoing, there's a link at the top that goes to my class result, and the video is there attached to that guy. Some of the classes that I've done more recently aren't available on the classes page, but they will be. Alright, so let's go back to our green pea and show you overlay, because overlay is more of a, and soft light and hard light, those are more texturing and lighting type things, so it'll make more sense if I do it here. So I'm going to pick the layer above everything there, and then I'm going to put some stuff in it. I'll just use I use a brush to create some patterns in various shades of colors and what have you there. Okay, so I just randomly made some shapes and colors there on that layer. Right now it's just set to normal. So, oh, and I used the mirror modes to help me get some quick patterns. Now I used layer transform and I moved the pattern down so it's sort of part of the ball now. And I'm going to set the mode to overlay so you can see what it does. So as you can see, overlay combines in a completely different way. It actually takes each of the colors, combines it with the green or whatever else is underneath it, and produces more of a lighting effect, as though it was shadows and what have you on there. This is kind of a fun way to play with it. You can change the different layer modes and see what kind of effects you get. Now, for me personally, the way I usually use overlay is to create a texture for the whole thing. So if I was to do a load image on the layer, I can download some of the really interesting textures that are part of Sketchclub's library, like paper textures and what have you. And overlay works really good with those. I can use this to give my entire picture the appearance as though I had drawn it on fabric or canvas or something. If I want the texture to be just on Petey, I would have to do some manipulations with it. Probably what I would do, this is going to sound complicated, but I would make a copy of the layer with the P on it. Then I would use the overlay in on mode, and I would merge that down, and then I'd use that in overlay mode, something like that. But as far as just one click, no, I wouldn't be able to do it. I'd have to do some work to make it just on the P. I can also just erase it. I mean, I could use the eraser and erase everywhere I don't want the texture. That would work as well. Okay, there, I did a real quick erase. It's not perfect, but you get the idea. You can erase it like that, and that would give it just on the P. And I can also transform that layer, in order to change or move the thing, make it smaller, make it bigger. Okay, so we're coming up to the end of our second hour here, which is enough time for one class, I think. Are there any questions before I leave off? It's pretty clear I'll have to come back and do some more stuff, because I never did get to the practical applications part. So that's going to have to be a separate class. Any questions on what I have shown you today? Alright, cool. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I will get the video up as soon as I can. Takes a little bit to process and upload and what have you. But I will upload one of these images of PD to P, and then I'll attach the video to that, so you'll be able to go to my page later and check it out.